Thank you, gentlemen. The second question will be posed by Scott Wall, and we will be starting with Mr. Grover.
Thank you. Wall Street hits Skid Row was one of the headlines during the economic collapse in our country over the past several weeks. Now, many people are uncomfortable about using hundreds of millions of federal taxpayer dollars to bail out banks and financial companies whose CEOs have made a tremendous amount of business and personal profits. What is your opinion on this multi-billion-dollar bailout, and how do we prevent it from happening again?
Well, I believe the bailout was wrong, and I applaud Mr. Lobianda for voting against it, because as you can see, since the bailout was passed, nothing has changed. The stocks go up, they go down, they go up, they go down, they level. It's because this is a global problem. Once we have a global conference on it and we fully understand the depth of the problem and how to correct it, then that's when action should be taken. We shouldn't be putting $700 billion in the pockets of bankers who squandered their money in the first place. The same reason you wouldn't let a child run around and eat anything in the candy store is the same reason you need regulations on bankers. Republicans, they pride themselves on deregulation. That means let the child run around the candy store, let them eat whatever they want, and when they pass out on the ground in diabetic shock, you get a $700 billion insulin shot. It's a shame that in America, we can bail out the rich and, the poor get to suffer. I mean, it's a sad day. But me, I don't have to worry about foreclosure because I work 2 jobs to make sure I don't ever see that day. Just like many other Americans, I work for my money, I pay my bills, and I shouldn't be paying for Wall Street's debt.
Thank you. Mr. Kurkowski.
Well, my opponent, Mr. Lobianda, voted against the bailout. I would have voted for it. I would have voted for it 2 times. There were 2 bills that came up, you'll recall. The first was a bill that was not, neither bill was perfect. The first bill did not have the taxpayer safeguards that the second one had. The second one, unfortunately, had some pork barrel funding, earmarks, if you will, that the first one did not have. But we had an economic crisis going on the weekend before those bills were being considered. Our credit was frozen. Now, we had to address that. It was a worldwide problem. It was escalating around the world as the time zones passed. And in fact, my opponent's presidential candidate, John McCain, suspended his campaign so that he could go to Washington and help broker the deal between the Republican White House and Democratic House leadership. I think it was very important to make the credit start to flow again in the economy. In fact, credit is to the economy what oil is to your engine. If you ran a car without oil, the engine would stop. And our economy would have stopped, and it would have hurt everybody here in the room. So I think it was necessary to do that. Just today there were reports that the credit seems to be flowing again in the economy. It seems to be working. It's going to take time. In the future, we're going to have to revisit regulation, which my opponent voted to deregulate in 1999.
Thank you. Mr. Lobianda.
The Wall Street crisis resulted from Wall Street CEOs making some very bad decisions and probably were involved in criminal activity with other people's money. Anytime Congress has tried to do anything really big, really fast, they've screwed it up. Was presented with a $700 billion request that was a blank check to one individual and a handful of his people. Secretary of the Treasury is a former CEO of Goldman Sachs. I don't have any confidence in his ability to distribute that money with folks that he associated with on Wall Street. The bill did not have taxpayer protections. That's a ruse. They're not there. It doesn't have the oversight. It doesn't close the foreign bank loophole. It doesn't do anything about the CEOs that caused the problem. They could have put all of this in the bill. We could have stayed in session. I was ready to. And when a number of Republicans and Democrats voted against it, what was the answer of the leadership in Washington and the Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi? To add $150 billion of sweeteners, money for rum producers in Puerto Rico. It doesn't solve the financial crisis, and it doesn't protect the middle class in Main Street.
Thank you. We'll next hear from Mr. Rosen.
Thank you very much. I think I would be on par with Socialist Congressman Bernie Sanders. I would take it a few steps more. It's not just this economic bailout from IEG. What I would have done is I would have probably put something forward to nationalize all the industries in America. They would be under public ownership, and the bulk of the profits would come back to us. Yes, there are criminals, there are people who should be doing jail time. The FBI and the U.S. Marshals should be arresting these people and taking back their golden parachutes. Another problem is we have a lot of people making way too much money. And I would suggest that this nationalization be paid for by the top 2%. That means a 10% tax for anyone who's making above $1 million and a 20% tax for anyone who's making above $500 million. Deregulation doesn't work. Libertarian economics is horrible. It's been tried in Bolivia. The same thing happened in Bolivia. The economy collapsed like an elephant dancing on styrofoam. We cannot have libertarian policy in Washington because it's real economic poison. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stein.
Mr. Kurkowski and myself are in the position of having to prove a negative. What would have happened had that rescue plan not gone through? Now, listen, I live month to month pretty much, and I'm not in favor of any Wall Street fat cats. I mean, we're picking on, we have the specter of boogeymen here. What would have happened if that bailout wasn't approved and the stock market went down 5,000 points in 2 days? That was a possibility. Mr. Lobiando had the luxury of knowing that hundreds, and I'm a registered Republican, Mr. Kurkowski is a Democrat. In Washington, over those 2 weeks, hundreds of Republicans and hundreds of Democrats got on board for this rescue plan. No one was peachy keen with it. You know, they would rather have listened to the calls coming into their offices and voted no on that. So Mr. Lobiando had the luxury. I'd like to know what his position would have been had he been the deciding vote, and the possibility of credit freezing up the next day based on his one vote, if that was a possibility, and car dealerships, banks, everyone started going out of business, and we faced a serious depression. But again, in this situation, we're having to prove a negative, and I disagree with Mr. Grover. The stock market pretty much has stabilized over the last few weeks. It could have been much, much worse had we not approved that rescue plan. And I emphasize again, I'm a small guy. We live month to month. I have no love for the people on Wall Street.
Thank you. Mr. Boyce.
I'd have voted against it the first time. I'd have voted against it the second time. And if elected, I'll continue to vote against and against and against any bailouts. There's no constitutional authorization to be taking $1 out of the pockets of the American people to bail out Wall Street bankers or anyone else.
Okay.
I'm not done. Al Capone had nothing on these mugs. This is the biggest heist in history. And the American people are being told it's for their benefit. Well, I have news for them. The American people are not so stupid as to not know when they're being robbed. The Declaration of Independence says our rights come from God, and we delegate some of that authority to empower government to protect those rights. Well, if I have no constitutional authorization, if I have no God-given right to take your money to bail out a Wall Street bankster, then where could government have gotten that authority? It doesn't have it. Never did have it. It's a disgrace, that bailout. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boyce.